Thank you, Dominic. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everyone. I was preparing an introduction for chapters 55 to 67. And if I can work this right, I have a PowerPoint that might make it more organized. If I can pull it off. Did that work? Are we sharing? Okay. So the chapters are 55 to 67. And for the 20 minutes that I was going to do, I wanted to break it down into like a plot recap, look at a couple of the themes that, not just in these chapters, but have been running all through the book. And a couple of techniques that, one thing I hear sometimes is that Trollope is a great storyteller, but he's not really has a technique as an artistic writer. And that, I don't see that at all. I think he's a wonderful artist. So I wanted to look at maybe two or three of the techniques that make him special. And then I got a couple questions, which seems to be what we always do for the small groups. Plot summary, I thought there were two threads going on. One was the love thread and one was the detective thread. So just looking at the, just to recap what goes on in the 12 chapters, the first one that we looked at, 55, Lady Glencora gets involved. There's a meeting that Planty Powell has where he's trying to get everybody together for his money change. And she has a special job she wants to get done. She has Lord Fawn coming. And she wants to start pulling the levers to get Lord Fawn to accept Lizzie back in his life. And she runs through that in a couple of chapters. And then the next section we see is Lizzie doesn't actually appear for the first couple of chapters in this section, but everything kind of spins around her. Job's comforters, Job from the Bible was, struck down by God, and he had comforters that came to him and said, you did something wrong. They were less comfort than they were supposed to be. And Lord Fawn has a little bit of that. He's our Job. And Mrs. Hittaway is at him at one point, and Frank Greystock is coming at him from the other side, saying, you've got to marry this woman. There's no reason you can't. Camperdown comes in and says, there's nothing we can do with the diamonds. That's all over. And then he gets a couple of notes from Lizzie. And the pressure is really on. I think there are these scenes where he's grabbing his head in his hands, and you can see that the vice is tightening. Then Mrs. Hittaway, who has been really putting the pressure on to make sure that Lord Fawn does not marry Lizzie, gets a hold of Mr. Gowron, our old friend Andy Gowron from Scotland, and pays for him to come up to London and speak with Lord Fawn. And she does. And while this is going on, things are shifting the sands are shifting under Lucy, where a lot of people are saying, he's not going to marry you. Can't you see? He's spending all his time with this other woman. You've got to give it up. And she's torn between what reason is telling her that all these people have a point, and her own heart, which she's given away, and she doesn't want to let go that easily. So she writes this wonderful letter. And I want to mention it briefly because it just sums up Lucy so well. She uses like short words, clear language, gets right to the point. There's no ego involved. There's no manipulation. And it's totally thoughtful of Frank if he really does want out. And then after the little letter scene, Mrs. Hittaway has her set up, and Lord Fawn does meet Andy. But it's a very awkward meeting. Lord Fawn is not good with dealing with the lower classes where he needs their help, or he needs their advice, or their witness testimony. So he kind of gets out of it. Plus the idea of what was going on down at the Rocks, Lord Fawn is very uncomfortable with. So he kind of flies out of there, and they give poor Andy a couple of cookies and say, okay, we'll check in with you later. The next chapter, Lady Fawn meets with Andy Gowron. Mrs. Hittaway is not done. She gets her mom in there and says, you got to hear this. You got to see what's going on here. And at this point, Lucy's really suffering. And she's talking to Lady Fawn and says, listen, if I do come back, the title of the chapter is Let It Be As Though It Had Never Been. Let's not mention him. Let's not say bad things about him. Let's just let it go. The next chapter also is titled with a quote, and it's Lizzie's quote. And this is where we first see Lizzie come into our section. Frank visits, and she has this kind of, not a showdown, but she kind of has it out with him. You know, she tells him about patience. She tells him about Lord Fawn and what's going on with him, and that she's going to be trying to meet him. And she kind of lays her cards on the table and says, listen, you know, the only reason, what I need from you is, are you going to marry me or what? You know, let's be clear about this. And they kind of give each other a sort of embrace, and then he leaves without a word. Then Lizzie, who has been promised a meeting with Lord Fawn. This is a great chapter. Lizzie's great friend, the great friend, of course, is Lady Glencora, who mentions that the Duke is also interested in this whole situation. Lizzie is approached for a loan by Mrs. Carbuncle, and she kind of isn't too comfortable with that. She kind of shifts it down from 250 pounds to, I think, 150. And then Lord Fawn enters, and he comes in, and the two of them just have this wonderful dialogue between them where he's trying to get out of this, and she's trying to make him squirm. And she's not sure yet. She wants to make him suffer. And if she marries him, she wants to marry him to get revenge, not for almost anything else. He needs her in terms of the marriage for money, but he's starting to think the money's just not worth it. It's, you know, this is more trouble than any money could be worth. So he tries to get out of it, and he says, listen, how about, in a very bureaucratic way, he goes, I'll write you a letter. And in the letter, I'll get all my thoughts down, and then we'll take it from there. And in the letter, I'll say, listen, if you still want to get married after reading this letter, we'll do it. And she goes, okay, great. I got what I wanted. But right after he leaves, she's riding high, and suddenly she gets a messenger from Scotland Yard. Next chapter, the Corsair is afraid Lord George hears about, in the paper, I guess everybody knows now, that there's been a development in the detective story, which we'll get to in just a minute. And he hears about it and goes and tries to find out what's going on, but the detectives are playing things very close to the vest. And then he goes to see Lizzie, and he's having it kind of out with her, and they're going back and forth. He's being totally honest with her. Like he's saying, look, the best thing to do is get it out in the open, you know, tell him that you knew about that the diamonds weren't in the box, and or just get out of the country, just run. You know, you can't deal with this. His honesty is so blunt that she takes it as rudeness and that he's a brute. And he's still thinking, he's still calculating what's the best thing for him in this situation. And he's thinking, maybe I should still marry this woman. She might need somebody, and I need this money. This would be a pretty good deal. But he starts thinking through, she's been such a liar all the way through. I can't trust anything about it. She may even be married, and I don't know. She may be in total debt. So he's got this amazing quote. There's an amazing quote there where he thinks to himself, there are men who always ride lame horses, and yet they see as much of the hunting as others. But even he doesn't dare to share even his boat with so dangerous a fellow passenger. So, you know, as unhappy as that marriage might be, it's just way too happy for him to take seriously. Lizzie's last scheme, we see Lizzie maybe sink to the lowest point we've seen her. She makes a clear attempt to break up Lucy and Frank and to destroy Lucy's belief in Frank, and tells him that Frank has jilted her and he just hasn't told her yet that she, Lizzie, and Frank are in love and they're going to get married. And Lucy, this is really almost a meeting of good versus evil in a way. Lucy and Lizzie are the two polar opposites. This is like matter and antimatter meeting. And Lucy coming in there, and her way with her, she says, if Frank feels that way, let him tell me. It's not for you to tell me, and I hope I never see you again. She doesn't take the carriage home. She won't have anything to do with Lizzie or anything about her, and she walks home. Next chapter is tribute, and this is another meeting. Lizzie's really having quite a busy time here. She met with Lord Fawn, she met with Lucy, and now she's meeting with Frank again. And they meet, and at this meeting, Frank decides against her. He says, she's too much for me, but he's still not sure if it's right to marry Lucy. Like the idea of marrying a young woman who doesn't have a penny, and he knows himself and his problems with money, and would it be right for her? Would it be right for him? And he's definitely decided against Lizzie, but he's not sure what to do about Lucy, and he takes off from there. But then the chapter shifts into a really interesting, this is the tribute section, I guess, the wedding presents, where Lady Carbuncle is trying to arrange as many wedding presents as she can for Lucinda. And it really brings down the idea of a wedding as being a business transaction, trying to get all the money that she can. And it's just heartbreaking to see. At times it's funny. It's very funny. And Lizzie loves it. She loves all this business. But what happens with poor Lucinda is kind of heartbreaking. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we have Mr. Emilius, and now that he sees that a lot of the other suitors have fallen to the wayside, he sees his door opening, and he starts making his moves in terms of polite kindness and attention to Lizzie. And Lady Carbuncle, I think, says, "I'll be hanged if he isn't after Portray Castle." And it seems that he is. Lucinda at this chapter 2 asks Lizzie for a favor to please, please, please go and see Lord Griffin and tell him to call it off. That she can't do it. It's just breaking her heart. And then the last chapter of the series, this section, is The Eye of the Public, where this is a great moment. Lord Fawn writes his letter, and it's a great letter. It's a masterpiece, really, in a way, of almost an anti-love letter. And Lucy gets it and is trying to think of what to do with it. And she gets a couple of ideas. She can answer it this way or answer it that way. She talks to Lady Carbuncle. And she thinks to herself, could she possibly marry a man who in so many words told her he didn't want her? Well, she thought she could. Like, she still wants her revenge. She's an amazing character. Like, what I don't know. She's somebody like you don't run into all the time. That, I think, is the one thread. But the other thread, and it's a shorter thread, that runs through the plot recap is the detective story. And the detective story, these are the two poles, I think, of the book. Like just as Lizzie and Lucy are the two character poles of kind of love and deception, and honesty and deception. The two stories that flow through, you've got the love story or the marriage story, and then you've got the detective story. And they're connected by the detective. For me, was always the one who is the person searching for the truth. So in the chapter titled Humpty Dumpty, the detectives, Bunfit and Gager, discuss the case. They know that the thieves must be Can and Smiler. And Gager goes undercover and meets with Billy Can and gets the info on Patience Crabstick, who he knows must be involved in it. And then he finds out from Billy that, yeah, she's hanging out at the Fiddle with One String. What a great name for a pub, if I ever get one. And so Gager decides, I'm going to the Fiddle with One String. I'm going to check out this Patience lady. And I'm going to pull this thing together. And we also find out, I think I read this right, that in this chapter, we find out that he's been carrying around a photograph of Patience Crabstick that he got during the course of the investigation. And it looks like he's maybe become attracted, or he's kind of fallen for her, just in terms of the photograph. So he's got a double reason for wanting to go to the Fiddle with One String. And he meets Patience. They hit it off, and they decide that he tells her, "Listen, you come back with me. I'll make sure nothing happens to you. We'll get married. You know, I'll take care of all that. You don't want to marry this thief, and we'll get you as a witness instead of being prosecuted." And she says, "Okay, that's great. I'm in." And then the last moment of the Scotland Yard, the detective story, is that Scotland Yard messenger that we saw earlier. When he comes in, he's telling Lizzie that Patience Crabstick has agreed to give evidence. So just when Lizzie was at her highest, like lending money and controlling Lord Fawn, she gets this bad news that shakes her world again. And that seems to be her pattern. She's just full of so many highs and lows. It's difficult to keep up with her. Now that the recap's done, I wanted to do a quick look at some of the themes that are happening. And when I think of themes, I always think of like psychological and social, like what's going on inside the characters' heads and what's going on among the characters. And psychologically, I think I came across one thing that said that this is really a study of the psychologically damaging effects of trying to survive in one of these aristocratic hierarchies. People tend to start to replace affections and loyalty with property and money. And Lucinda's, this quote about the wedding presents just broke my heart. Um, Lucinda said, I don't want any of these presents. I can't stand it. And Lady Carmichael says, they are worth money, Lucinda. And when a girl's married, she always gets them. And Lucinda says, yes. And when they come from people who love her and who pour them into her lap with kisses because she has given herself to a man that she loves, then it must be nice. And with that quote, you see that Lucinda is living in a loveless world. And worse, she's totally aware of it. Like, I think the pressure's coming down on her of this psychological damage of trying to make it in this society is really starting to tell. Also in the things that happen, the struggle for ascendancy and domination and power, Frank and Lord Fawn are kind of at each other. Lizzie is living like this. A lot of times not in this section, but Lizzie's always been described almost as an animal, a jungle animal. Like she's always looking for domination and power. And even Lady Gwen, who's one of my favorite characters in all of Trollope, she loves getting in there and pulling the levers and making this, putting the word into this character's ear and talking to Lord Fawn over here and talking to this character and kind of maneuvering things around to make sure that, in fact, she does that so much better than Planty Pal. It's almost like she's the real politician in the family. He's working on his money problems, but she's the one who's doing the schmoozing and the parties. And then finally, the psychological thing is, we see it's a portrait of people who seek security and status and prestige and elegance, but in the end, it ends up feeling so cheap. It's all snobbery and envy and pretentiousness. You see this in Lady Carbuncle and Lord George, and especially Lord Truett. And again, going back to Lucinda, I think Lady Carbuncle was talking to Lizzie, and she said, you got to talk to her. And Lizzie says to Lady Carbuncle, she seems to me to be very unhappy, Mrs. Carbuncle. And even Lizzie sees this, that this is really damaging, and it's damaging to these folks that are trying to survive it. The social themes, I think, and I don't mean to be too simplistic about it, but a lot of times with Trollope, it boils down to the moral theme. The social theme is, how are we treating each other? And we were saying before how Lizzie and Lucy are the two polar opposites, of love. I hate, simplistically, it's like love versus money. But you start to see the world tipping from an older world where love was more valued, maybe, I'm not sure, to a world where money and greed, and you see it in all these characters with the different marriages, till we get to the scene, a wonderful scene with Mrs. Hittaway and her mother, Lady Fawn. And Mrs. Hittaway says, that a man such as Frank Greystock, in debt and in Parliament, and going to all the best houses and parties or whatever, should marry your governess? What was he to get by it? That's what I want to know. And Lady Fawn, the moral voice of the old world, says, I suppose he loved her. Laws, Mama, how antediluvian you are. Like the idea that love would play any kind of part in today's world. And I think that we see in this too, and these aren't Trollope's words, but if I was to boil it down a little bit, it seems like money makes life convenient, but love makes life meaningful. And even convenience is cheated in a way. Like Lizzie has £8,000 a year, I think. Frank has maybe 4,000 a year. And both of them are broke. It's not just convenience. It's just, it's kind of a disrespect for economics. I don't know how to say it, but it's like they're not taking care of things that deserve more respect than they're giving. Another social theme, of course, is the truth and lies. And I think what's profound, like underneath the plot that's going on, is this is a theme that's in so many different works of literature. The wasteland theme, the living of an inauthentic life, living a life that's not true to you. Truth and honesty are needed to connect to an authentic existence. And there's this thing where people are more concerned with the outward, or Lizzie especially, are more concerned with the outward shows, the signs of values, like the diamonds, more than they are than the true values, the facts and emotions that they represent. They seem to be more interested in the signifiers than the true values. The Eustace Diamonds portrays, this is from an article I found online called The Truth in Trollope's Fiction. The Eustace Diamonds portrays a world in which liars prosper and truth tellers suffer, a society whose mediums of exchange, language, money, and property have become detached from their natural values. And when you have that separation, you have people who are marrying not for love, but for convenience or for money. There's a great couple of quotes here about Lizzie's the ultimate liar. She's just, I mean, there's almost no truth in her. And the one quote from chapter, I can't read my own thing there because I'm blocked out, but when there came to her any, this is Lizzie now, when there came to her any fair scope for acting, she was perfect. There was no reality about her. The want of it, and then I can't read it, was maybe not, was there to most unobservant eyes, but give her a part to play that required exaggerated strong action, she hardly ever failed. That might be chapter 61, if you guys can see it better than I. And then the other one is similar. This is Lizzie again. She did perceive in some dark way that good as her acting was, it was not quite good enough. Lucy held her ground because she was real. You may knock a diamond and not even scratch it, but whereas paste in rough usage betrays itself, Lizzie, with all her self-protestations, knew that she was paste and knew that Lizzie was the real stone. And there you have that idea that Lizzie knows that her castle's built on sand in a way that, anyway, I think the quote speaks for itself, forgive me. And then the detective story too, I saw as, we talked about this before, for me, I love good detective stories. Hamlet is one, I think, or Oedipus. And it's always the honest man trying to find the truth in a dishonest or tricky society. And that's what we have here, those detectives, you know, they have this workaday job, but their job is uncovering the truth. And it's a very important job in society. And then again, these techniques, just to, I hope I'm not running over time. One thing I noticed with the narrator, in this book especially, the narrator, with all the lies flying around in this book, the narrator always tells us the truth. In fact, he says, you know, dear reader, this character hasn't had the opportunity to know Frank Greystock as well as you have. You know, I've shown you all of the true things about it. So you get this idea that the narrator continually addresses us to remind us that we have the full truth that the characters do not. And that gives us, somebody else mentioned this in a previous get-together, that idea of dramatic irony, which gives us suspense. We know more than the characters do. Real quickly, I think it was Alfred Hitchcock had this theory called the bomb theory. And he said, if I'm shooting a scene, I can have two people talking about cricket or whatever, and all of a sudden a bomb goes off and everybody's shocked. But if I show them the bomb at the beginning of the scene, and then pull back and let them talk about cricket, people are going crazy. Like the suspense is there, and that's the dramatic irony. Another technique I like by Trollope is this idea of stop time. You see it all throughout the novel, but one place where I caught it was the scene between Lizzie and Lord Fawn, where Lizzie, chapter 61, where Lizzie said, can you justify yourself in your own heart? And then there's like 1.5 or 2 or 3 pages, I forget, where you're inside Lord Fawn's mind and he's calculating. And then finally, you come back to the scene where it's almost like if it was on stage, everybody would freeze. And then you come back and Lizzie was still waiting for the answer to a question like 2 pages later, because we've been inside Fawn's mind. And then symbolism, the fox hunt. I think one of the themes that's going on here too is the idea that things are shiny, but they might not have, but they're not valued as they should be. And the fox hunt, it made me think of, of course it ties into the courting and the marriage stuff, but Oscar Wilde had a quote where he called the fox hunt the indescribable chasing the inedible. And that idea that they're chasing after this fox and they can't do anything with it. And that, you know, all the people are chasing after these diamonds. And that's the second thing, the diamonds in the empty box. That idea that the thief stealing an empty box is a perfect image of it, because the empty box is, it doesn't have the value inside. And maybe that's a quote for and poor Lizzie, she has these diamonds, so she can't do anything with them. So like the aristocracy thing, it seems it's supposed to be shiny, but it's attractive, but maybe empty. And that reminded me of a quote from Gulliver's Travels. I'm going out on a limb here, forgive me. But in Gulliver, in the 4th part, where it's the Wyndhams and the Yahoos, he talks about the Wyndhams are trying to understand why the Yahoos, these brutish human animals, are always digging up these diamonds, these shiny diamonds. And it said, in some fields of his country, there are certain shining stones of several colors, whereof the Yahoos are violently fond, and when part of these stones is mixed in the earth, as it sometimes happeneth, they will dig with their claws for whole days to get them out, and then carry them away and hide them by heaps in their kennels, but still looking round with great caution, for fear their comrades should find out their treasure. My master, the Wynnum, said he could never discover the reason for this unnatural appetite, or how these stones could be of any use to a Yahoo, but now he believed it might proceed from the same principle as avarice, in which I described to mankind. So those were the three techniques I thought I could share. And now I'm kind of stuck. I lost you guys. And the discussion questions for when the smaller groups. One thing is the idea of pressures on the women, the pressures about marriage and how they affect the different women. Another question you might be able to discuss is the men. Trollope goes into some trouble, especially in chapter 35, saying he shifted to not anti-heroes, but complicated characters. How do the men like Frank, Lord Fawn, and Sir Griffin come across with both their strengths and their weaknesses? Are there any admirable men? And then finally, I think one of my favorite parts of this section was these chapters have a series of wonderful confrontations or showdowns between Lizzie and Lord Fawn, and Frank and Lord George and Lucy Morris with Lizzie. So you can pick one and think about what's your favorite one, and what did you think was important about it, or what important about the outcome. So that's it, and thank you guys all for letting me do this for 20 minutes. I hope I was on time, and if not, there's not much I can do about it. So thank you.